Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent called for reforms at the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, saying both institutions need to be fit for purpose once again. Now, speaking at the spring meetings, he posits that the IMF should focus on driving economic stability and growth and not lend to countries unwilling to implement necessary reforms.
I wish to be clear. America first does not mean America alone. To the contrary, it is a call for deeper collaboration and mutual respect among trade partners. Far from stepping back, America First seeks to expand U.S. leadership in international institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. Intentional policy choices by other countries have hollowed out America's manufacturing sector and undermined our critical supply chains, putting our national and economic security at risk. President Trump has taken strong actions to address these imbalances and the negative impacts they have on Americans. The status quo of large and persistent imbalances is not sustainable. It is not sustainable for the United States, and ultimately, it is not sustainable for other economies. But the bank, like the IMF, has strayed in certain respects from its initial mission. The bank should no longer expect blank checks for vapid, buzzword-centric marketing accompanied by half-hearted commitments to reform. As the bank returns to its core mission, it must use its resources as efficiently and effectively as possible. And it must do so in ways that demonstrate tangible values for all member countries.
Now, for the latest update from the IMF World Bank meetings in Washington, D.C., Arise business correspondent Reuters Aderi joins us now. Good morning, Reuters. Another day in the middle of all the activity. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Abby. Good morning to all our viewers out there. Great to be with you again.
Same here. Well, let's get right into it. Let's begin, Reuters, with what Scott Bessent means by the IMF's distracted goals of crowding out its true mission.
Yeah, I mean, if we think about the core mandates of the IMF, right, it is to promote economic stability through its member countries. It is supposed to be about capacity building through training. It's supposed to be about, lending in order to assist countries that have fiscal issues, and also to promote, stable exchange rates and avoid competitive devaluation. So he is suggesting in his comments that by focusing on gender and focusing on climate change, somehow that is distracting the IMF from those core mandates that I have listed. So that's really what essentially he's saying. And also, in the clip you just played, he talked about efficiency in terms of using its funding, of which, of course, the United States is the #1 donor. So that's really the gist of what Scott Bessent was talking about.
Right, it's quite a compendium there. But is this really about China?
Well, because he mentioned exchange rates and he mentioned devaluations, President Trump has called China, or he says China should be labeled a currency manipulator. And then Bessent also said that the IMF needs to tell the truth and speak, forcibly. So he's essentially saying that, with the pressure they're trying to put on China, although we heard the news yesterday that President Trump says the 145% tariffs could be brought down, but still it is about isolating China, yes.
All right, well, let's really look at this, Reuters, and pick your brain on this one. Just how important is the U.S. to the IMF and the World Bank?
It is very important, Abby. I think we have a chart that we got that shows that the U.S. in terms of, quota funding. The IMF has this quota funding from its member nations based on the size of the economy. The U.S. is the largest economy in the world, so it is the largest quota donator to the IMF. Also, in terms of donations to the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development, it is the largest single shareholder, also the largest donor to the International Development Agency. Those are the two funding arms for the World Bank. So you can imagine the U.S., Bessent did not say they are pulling out or anything of the sort, but where were the U.S. to pull out, the IMF and the World Bank would struggle to operate efficiently. The U.S. basically has veto power. It is, essentially the founder of the IMF and the World Bank. So critical support from the United States.
All right, so essentially stuck between, a rock and a hard place is what we're seeing right here. But we understand that we're expected to hear from the IMF Managing Director in about a couple of hours. What does Besson think her response will be?
Abby, that is the question of the day. I think what we are going to scramble over there to get there as early as possible, because we imagine it's going to be a packed room with the response. And by the way, this press conference today was already scheduled months ago. I mean, this has, Besson just timed it. Again, he was speaking at the Institute of International Finance. He timed this ahead of this policy discussion with the Gorgieva. He's basically calling her leadership into question, right? And so, look, I imagine that she will bring up the extended finance facility and EFF that was granted to Argentina just last week. That was a 20 billion facility, which includes an immediate $12 billion disbursement to Argentina. Besson flew to Buenos Aires and he endorsed it, and he praised Javier Milei, who, by the way, is a big supporter of Donald Trump. So he wasn't critical about the support that the IMF was giving to Argentina and it has given to other nations. So I expect her to mention things like that, which are parts of the core mandate of the IMF. We also expect her to defend her leadership, defend everything that the IMF has been doing. We'll see how delicately she speaks, because as we've just established, the United States is critical to the IMF. So she probably doesn't want to poke the bear, but she also wants to defend herself. So look, it's going to be very interesting to listen to what she has to say later
Certainly
today.
Quite tricky, because you have legitimate concerns, and then you also have to apply some degree of diplomacy. So we will have to wait and see, right? Well, let's talk about Nigeria's delegation in Washington, D.C. There's another investment forum. What was discussed there?
Yeah, well, Abby, I mean, Nigeria has been steadfast in selling its reforms, and letting its reforms essentially speak for itself. That's been the theme. So it's gathered, a number of foreign investors in Houston, Texas, in New York. We were there to witness what was going on in New York, and now in Washington, D.C., just basically with panel sessions, listening to international investors talk about how interested they are in investing in Nigeria and investing on the back of liberating the exchange rates, for instance, removing fuel subsidies, freeing up fiscal space for Nigeria, and crucially, with the central bank paying off backlogs, releasing the reserves, gross net reserves, net reserves, which are 23 billion as opposed to the 40 billion gross reserves, being more transparent. These are the things that led by the Olayemi Cardoso of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Wale Edun of the Ministry of Finance. They've essentially been going around talking to investors. So Nigeria now, with where oil prices are, we talked about oil prices just yesterday, being below $70, the IMF also seeing $66 oil. Nigeria has to show up its finances. So these investment forums have been very crucial in selling the reform narrative of Nigeria and attracting, crucial investment dollars into Africa's most populous nation.
Undoubtedly, very great insight as always, Rotas. We've unfortunately run out of time, but we will certainly stick around and, wait out for more updates from you. Many thanks for joining us. You're watching.